Mixed martial arts, Muay Thai, boxing, jiu-jitsu, these are all for sport fighting. There's nothing controversial about that statement. We can all agree these martial arts are practiced, by and large, for sport. But stuff like Krav Maga, Aikido, Kajukenbo, these are real. This is for street fighting. Here's what I have to say about that. Street fighting is a sport. Now, when I say something like street fighting is a sport, inevitably there's going to be someone who gets pissed off thinking that's literally what I mean. Guys, I don't actually believe there's a literal street fighting competition league, but I do mean that for most street fight situations, there is a sportive element to how they go. There's a clear winner and a loser, and even though you don't want to admit it, there are rules. It's very easy to assume, especially if you've never been in any real fighting situation, that once you lose the security of the ring or the cage, all bets are off. But the fact is, that just doesn't hold up empirically. People tend to not have life or death street fights. Even as much as your self-defense instructor wants that to be true, it's just not. Partly because our biology dictates that we don't want to beat each other to death, it is just something that's gross and abhorrent to us, but also because there's very few things that people can get so pissed off about that they're willing to kill another human being with their bare hands. But there's a whole world of things that people are willing to get pissed off about and settle with fisticuffs. Now, obviously, when I say that, I have to also respect that there are plenty of times when someone does get seriously hurt or killed in a street fight, but these tend to be more of the outlier rather than the rule. And speaking of the rules, there is usually kind of an unspoken rule set about when the fight is over, and that's usually judged by committee. That can mean the fight is immediately broken up, or it can be allowed to go on until someone is very clearly the winner. At that point, usually the loser's friends will jump in and pull them off and say he's had enough. And again, that isn't always the case, but in general, we kind of understand that there is a limit to how far a street fight can go. I'm sure we've all heard the old adage that you don't want to bring a knife to a gunfight. And that is true, but so is the inverse. You don't necessarily want to bring a knife to a fist fight. When I say that, I don't mean that you don't want to have some kind of way to protect yourself if shit hits the fan, but what I do mean is that now, if you bring your weapon out, you are escalating the situation. And that might work out for you, but it might not. And a lot of times, these situations are resolved not by bloody murder, but by the person just getting their licks in. For me, the word fight means consensual, at least to some degree. I'm agreeing to throw down with you, you're agreeing to throw down with me, and we're gonna know how exactly someone wins and how exactly someone loses. And by adding the word street, we're only defining what the arena for that fight is gonna be. It doesn't change anything about what we're doing. It is still consensual violence, which is why there are so many states in the United States that operate under mutual combat laws. Mutual combat laws are exactly what they sound like. If you get mad enough at somebody that you want to settle something with a fist fight right there in the street, you can both agree to a certain amount of rule sets. Sometimes you have to ask a police officer to watch, but by and large, you can engage in combat right then and there. Now, there are caveats to that rule. Obviously, you're not allowed to murder, you're not allowed to maim, but if it comes to just throwing down, have at it. Now, obviously, you don't always know who your opponent in the street is going to be. It could be a guy with zero training who you outweigh by 50 pounds, or it could be a Golden Glove state champion. It doesn't matter, and to that element, yes, there is something a little riskier about street fighting versus sport fighting. But at the end of the day, what you're really telling me when you're more concerned with street fighting versus sport fighting is that you just don't want to put the work in. You think you can get by with the bare minimum training and just pull off your dirty fighting tricks in the street where there are no rules and you'll be successful. But here's the thing. If you can't fight in here, you can't fight anywhere. Now, I'm not saying that every person who trains for street fighting is necessarily bad at fighting in the ring or in the cage, but what I am saying is a lot of people think that without the restrictions of the ring or the cage, they're suddenly going to turn into ninja masters when they're not in the gym. You're only going to be able to perform as you practice, and if you don't practice well in the gym, you're not going to perform well outside the gym. Now, one thing I notice is that when people talk about street fighting, they really think they're talking about self-defense. And the two could not be more different. Like I said, street fighting is when two or more parties agree to engage in combat. Self-defense is about avoiding that combat. The fact of the matter is, if you're really concerned with self-defense training, your training should look a lot less like martial arts, eye gouges, and groin kicks, and a lot more like people skills, de-escalation, and how to read a room. Not just run away, which is honestly the worst advice someone can give you, but learn how to walk away before the fight even becomes an issue. Now, that's not to say that you can get away with not knowing how to fight, because again, combat, self-defense. As much as you want to avoid combat, It only behooves you to also be good at combat. People like to conflate street fighting and self-defense because if you're not wearing gloves and there's no ref, they've got to be the same thing. But self-defense is more of a mindset and it's more of preparation for an event. Street fighting is the actual event. But the prevalent form of violence in the United States is not one-on-one attacks on the street. It's not home invasions. It's actually domestic violence situations. A lot more often than you would think, the person that you're going to have to fight off is going to be someone you're close to, someone you love, someone you trust. Now, this could be as simple as Uncle Jim having a little too much to drink at the party and taking a swing at your dad, or, unfortunately, it can be a husband who decides to come home and take out his frustrations on his wife. But the fact of the matter is, the overwhelming majority of violent situations in the United States are domestic violence situations, not one-on-one street fights. And the goal in the two could not be more different. If you're training for street fighting, it's because you're training to stroke your ego. You want to prove that you're the top dog, but you don't want to get in there with the real top dogs. You just want to pick the random drunk who annoys you at the bar. But if we're talking about assault, you're not training to beat somebody. You're training to protect yourself. And this is why I say that combat sports training is the most effective form to learn personal protection. Because every single day that you step on the mat, bump hands, and start rolling, you are inoculating yourself to the stress of violence. You are getting more and more comfortable with being uncomfortable. Whereas with most self-defense street fighting styles, you don't necessarily have the same amount of ego-killing, constant pressure testing. Constant pressure, kept at a manageable level, will inoculate most people to violence such that they're good at protecting themselves in 99% of scenarios. Is it perfect? Is it foolproof? No. Mixed martial arts obviously doesn't deal with multiple attackers, doesn't deal with weapons, doesn't deal with scenario-based locations. But I think it's a much safer bet to know that you can handle yourself one-on-one with someone roughly your own size than theoretically be good at fighting 5 people who all have knives on you. Again, practice versus theory. I think it's much better to be good at fighting in a sportive context than it is to be good at self-defense or personal protection in a theoretical context. Now, when I say that out loud, that sounds pretty obvious because obviously you want to know something for real rather than in theory. I think you'd be surprised how many people out there would actually rather engage in the power fantasy of a theory than the humility of practicality. My point is that when you have something like a sport that you can practice, you have a way of knowing, did I succeed at what I'm doing or did I fail at what I'm doing? But if your self-defense reality-based training doesn't have a way of judging winning and losing, how do you actually know how good you are at something? Yes, maybe you can do a knife disarm against an opponent who stabs at you and just stands there, but can you do it when he's trying to constantly stab you? If you can only do it in compliant partner practice or in demo drills, but you can't do it even with moderate success in light sparring, then you can't do it, period. So again, I have to say, it's much better to know that you're good at fighting, even in one context, than to only think you are in a self-defense context. But the real reason that I think this is so important has very little to do with criticizing self-defense martial arts and more to do with our responsibility to our students as martial arts instructors. Because like I said, every single day that you spar, you are getting humbled. Even if you're the best fighter in your gym, at some point you did face a setback. At some point, somebody was better than you. And so you had to learn that as good as you are, there's always someone better. But I see way too many martial arts instructors who tell their clients and students they can turn them into the unstoppable killing machine, that no matter what happens, you will always be able to come out on top. To quote a very wise man, all we're doing with martial arts training is increasing the chances of someone's survivability. We're not giving you a guarantee of victory, we're just giving you the chances that it might work out for you. But I see too many martial arts instructors, both from the combat sports world and the self-defense world, who tell their students they can make them 100% the most effective martial arts machine on the planet. And the fact is, that just isn't the case. A, no training is perfect, there's always going to be gaps. And B, you're going to have a bad day from time to time. Even if you are at the absolute peak of martial arts and physical conditioning, you're going to have a bad day where you're sleepy and you're sick and someone can get the drop on you. So I think it's important to not just say these things, but also in training, enforce with your students they will constantly fail at what they're trying. The goal is not to always win, the goal is to minimize the times that you lose. If your training is only ego boosting you, only making you think that you are the ultimate killer in any context, it's really doing you guys a disservice. But that's my rant for the day. I don't know if it made any sense. I really didn't plan this video out. It's just something I wanted to say based on recent events. All that being said, you guys, if you enjoyed this video, if you feel like you learned something, please make sure to subscribe, tap the notification bell, like, share, and leave a comment. As always, this has been Rob in Combat Self-Defense. I want to thank you for all the hard work. Thank you for the hard work yet to be done, and I'll see you next time.